President Ettinger, we're ready whenever you are. I know there was a little confusion with the Zoom links, so there might still be people joining from that.
Okay, great. Amber, you think I should go ahead though?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, good afternoon then. I'm going to call to order the University Senate. That's item 1. Item number 2 concerns administrative responses to the University Senate action and is presented for information purposes. Item number 3 is a list of recent faculty, staff, and student deaths that have been sent for announcement to the Senate. I invite you to observe a moment of silence while I read the names. In the areas of faculty and staff, Michael Horrigan, James Johnson, Thomas Johnson, Timothy Walseth, Gloria Williams, and then for student, it's Chris Renzi. Item number 4 is approval of the minutes from the University Senate meeting on February 22nd, 2024. Amber, would you please initiate the poll?
A few more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. With 105 ayes and 0 nays, that motion carries.
Very good, thank you very much. The next item is my report, and I have several updates to provide. I'll start with my excitement about the choice of Dr. Rebecca Cunningham to serve as the 18th president of the University of Minnesota. There's no question that she's immensely qualified to steer the U of M going forward. She's the leader at an outstanding institution, the University of Michigan. She's committed to research excellence and has her own impressive research credentials. She's worked extensively with faculty and students in her prior roles. She's familiar with legislative outreach and interacting with donors. And as a huge added bonus, she comes with extensive personal and system knowledge about medicine and academic health. And I'll also join many others in complimenting the Board of Regents on the selection process. The presidential search went as planned and on schedule, and it yielded 3 finalists who all agreed to be public, the first time this has happened in anyone's memory, enabling the full university community to be able to judge the merits of each candidate right along with the regents. As the Star Tribune editorial praised, the search process was a testament to transparency that resulted in 3 exemplary finalists. Also, each of the finalists spoke how smooth their trips around the state were and how well they were treated. I commend the Board of Regents staff for the thoughtful planning, execution, and hospitality, and also offer heartfelt thanks to our colleagues at Morris, Crookston, Duluth, and Rochester for making those visits so successful and memorable. Rest assured, I will do everything I can in the coming months to ensure that Dr. Cunningham has the smoothest of transitions to the U of M. She's not going to be here in any kind of approaching full-time capacity anytime soon, but she will. You may see her around the campus next week, and I'll have an opportunity to spend a couple of hours with her, and she's going to start getting the lay of the land here. Together, we hope to keep this great university on a positive trajectory in terms of our mission and in terms of the public perception that deservedly matches our success. I'd now like to provide you with an update on the priorities for my interim year, as established last summer in collaboration with the Board of Regents. A consistent theme in these mutual priorities was the idea of seeking to accomplish a public reset in terms of how the university is perceived by others. One aspect of this was our Dear Minnesota campaign, and I'd like to share a brief update on these marketing efforts, which have been led by Chief Marketing Officer Ann Aronson and her team. We launched the Dear Minnesota campaign in the fall to reverse the trend of declining perceptions about the university's research mission and to improve our favorability among Minnesotans. We've now conducted early market research to measure the campaign's effectiveness among the general public and among opinion leaders. After just this short period, the results show significant, in some cases double-digit improvement. Favorable feelings about the University of Minnesota are up 11%. Those who believe that the University of Minnesota research is important claim 12%, and those who believe that the university is doing a good job of conducting research increased 7%. All of these metrics are statistically significant and projectable across the state of Minnesota with a 95% confidence rate. We've also seen broad use of the campaign by campuses, colleges, and units across the across the university, excuse me. In addition, on the PR side, I mean, as I've kind of said in past Senate meetings, we're really kind of taking every opportunity we can, whether it's television, radio, print appearances. I was on KARE 11 recently. I've had continuing meetings with the Star Tribune editorial board. I spoke to the State Chamber of Commerce, and even dating way back to such events as Farm Fest and the State Fair. And I'll certainly be encouraging Dr. Cunningham to continue with this kind of forward-looking and being out there and make sure you're approachable in these ways. On the legislative outreach side, I mean, clearly one key component was the hiring of Melissa Lopez Franzen, and in turn, the hiring she's done of her team. We've been very busy at the Capitol already since the legislative session kicked off on February 12th, with hearings in front of a number of committees, including presentations of our capital and supplemental budget requests. We are continuing to make the case for full funding of the university's legislative requests. These include $500 million for building maintenance funds, otherwise known as HEAPR, $45 million in supplemental budget funds for our core mission support, and $80 million in academic health funding. Recently, UMN advocates sent 386 emails to 90 state elected officials in support of these legislative requests. And I highly encourage all university stakeholders, students, faculty, staff, and alumni to become UMN advocates and to help advance the university's requests at the state capitol. Late last week, Governor Walz and legislative majority leaders released a supplemental budget proposal that at the time, as of now, identifies no new resources for the university's legislative requests. I am meeting with Governor Walz and Speaker Hortman next week on this and other issues, and obviously the session still has several months to play out, and so we will continue to push for what we think is necessary at the university. The Senate Health and Human Services Committee heard the university's academic health legislative request at its March 21st meeting. Dean Tolar testified that the university and the 6 health sciences schools stand ready to help shape the state's ecosystem in terms of healthcare. We have also testified in reaction to bills in both the House and the Senate regarding PELRA, the Public Employee Relations Act. These would modify the public employee definition and modify the University of Minnesota employee bargaining units. The University of Minnesota actively supports a positive and respectful work environment for all its employees, both bargaining unit and non-bargaining unit, faculty, staff, and students. And let me be clear, the university does not wish to prevent employee groups from organizing. In fact, the university agrees that a review of PELRA is due, given it's a 40-year-old law and given changes in the overall work environment and the needs of the university. However, any changes to PELRA should ensure that the university's workforce is able to fulfill its mission of teaching, research, and outreach. And we feel the best way to move forward is for the university administration to work in close collaboration with the employees and shared governance partners who would be impacted by any such changes. You know, in fact, this is exactly the same way the PELRA law came into being in 1980 to create the statutorily defined bargaining units we have now. There is a cross-functional team that's been gathering data in order to address the fiscal note regarding this legislation, and we are analyzing other operational implications to the university. My responsibility, like any good public steward, is to properly discuss all of the potential impacts of a change to PELRA with the university community and conscientiously evaluate what that bill might mean for the future. Government relations is following additional legislation impacting the university beyond PELRA. A bill was recently heard to waive access fees for disabled veterans to the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, and government relations is in communication with Arboretum staff on any potential financial implications of this. Director Angie Hall of the Disability Resource Center testified at the House and Senate Higher Education Committees on the RISE Act, a bill specifying documentation and other requirements for higher education students with a disability. After the state legislative session concludes, We will continue rebuilding our presence at the U.S. Capitol with a reinvigorated federal relations team. I'd also like to recognize and thank our two faculty legislative liaisons for this year, Professors Donna Spenis Martin and Robert Blair. And I think you're hearing from Professor Blair later in the meeting. On the healthcare side, I mean, we had the announcement of the letter of intent and the framework that we're working on with Fairview. We're kind of hard at work on more of these behind the scenes efforts with an aim toward getting to a deal that could be approvable by the Board of Regents if it all falls into place by the end of September. In the meantime, I think it's created a much improved public posture for both the university and for Fairview to have these positive dialogues going on. And of course, as I've mentioned in the past, we continue to do things in healthcare beyond just the Twin Cities partnership. Our University of Minnesota Rochester continues to do great things on the healthcare front in the Rochester community. And our new partnership with CentraCare and St. Cloud will be opening here in upcoming years to enable us to expand our ranks of medical school students. One of the other priority areas that the board asked me to look at is in the area of financial stewardship. In my months here, I feel like I've had the opportunity to work with folks and learn that the university does have tight financial reporting and controls. It has a proven budgeting process. We continue to enjoy an excellent credit rating, and our spending has been over a long period of time at around a 3% annualized rate, which would certainly belie any sort of public national stories of runaway spending in higher education. I mean, I think it's really been managed on a professional basis. We are also in the process of looking at all of our greater Minnesota campuses with an eye toward enrollment modeling and financial sustainability. And each of these campuses will be reporting on their game plans for this at the May Board of Regents meeting. The last of the priority areas provided to me in collaboration with the Board of Regents was campus safety. Ensuring public safety on or near our campuses remains a top concern of mine. System-wide, our various teams have been dedicated to this issue. We have utilized the one-time financial support provided by the legislature last session for enhancements on each of these campuses. In addition to that, I'm excited about the two pilot programs that we were implementing and exploring in the Twin Cities campus area. The first is expanded mutual aid. You may have seen things in the news about this. UMPD will now respond to all 911 calls for MPD in the defined area between University Avenue and 4th Street Southeast and from 35W to Oak Street Southeast. This is a natural extension of the U's commitment to student safety in an area where many students and U-affiliated organizations live. DPS is also exploring the creation of a safety center in Dinkytown, analyzing a variety of locations. The goal would be to create a multifunctional space for university community members to access safety resources and support from UMPD, Dinkytown safety guides, and so forth. These represent responsive and creative ideas for bringing the University of Minnesota resources directly to the community, and in many cases are direct responses to input we receive from parents, students, staff, and other community members. I'd like to also provide an update on the Cloquet Forestry Center. I'm pleased to share that legislation was introduced in both the House and Senate, and that we are meeting with relevant committees and working through the next steps regarding the return of the land to the Fond du Lac Band. There have also been very positive discussions with the band regarding a way to continue the research that the university has conducted on this property for many years. Senior advisor Karen Diver and I enjoyed the opportunity to have another meeting with tribal leaders late last month. We reviewed the university's efforts to date related to the Truth Report and received helpful and important input from the leaders. We plan to present a more formal update on the Truth Report at the June Board of Regents meeting. Just yesterday, we announced that Dr. Charles Neese will assume the role of chancellor at our Duluth campus beginning this summer. Dr. Neese was one of 3 candidates who visited UMD and participated in interviews with key stakeholder groups earlier this month. So indeed, it was just great to see, frankly, that we had 3 public finalists for the university president position, 3 public finalists for the UMD chancellor, and in each case had rich input from the broad campus community as to what they heard from each of these candidates. Dr. Neese comes to UMD with over 25 years of experience in higher education. He currently serves as the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the University of California, Merced, a campus in the UC system founded in 2005. He earned his PhD and Master's of Education degrees at Washington State University and his undergraduate degree at the University of St. Thomas, right here in St. Paul. In fact, he's from Hutchinson, Minnesota originally. Special thanks to co-chairs Chancellor Lori Carroll from the Rochester campus and Lisa Irwin, UMD's Vice Chancellor for Student Life, and the entire search committee for their work in this process. The docket for today's University Senate meeting includes the administration's response to the Workforce Reinvestment Resolution that was endorsed by this body last April. Early in my interim presidency, I asked Provost Croson, Vice President Horstman, and then Senior Vice President Franz to compose a task force to evaluate the resolution's 23 requests and provide recommendations for the implementation of each. I'm very grateful to Mary Roman Kuhl, Senior Director of Total Rewards, and Beth Lewis, Vice Provost for Faculty and Academic Affairs, who co-chaired the task force. And I'm thankful to the entire task force for their focus on this work that has culminated in the robust report that is also included in the administrative response. I want to again thank the University Senate for calling attention to the issues in this workforce reinvestment resolution and recognize that this answer that we're providing today is just the first step in responding to these important resolution areas. The administration agrees that the university's people are critical to the successful delivery of all three parts of our mission: teaching, research, and outreach. I'd also like to note that Mary and Beth have agreed to present the task force report at a future University Senate meeting, and they will be able to speak more fully about the development of the report and the specific recommendations in there. This concludes my report, and I'm happy to turn to any questions to the president. There were none submitted in advance, but I think, have a couple minutes to take questions from the floor if there are any. And Amber, if you see a hand, I'm not saying the whole group, so if you see somebody, let me know, please.
Sure. First up, we have Adolfo.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, President Tinger, and good afternoon, everyone. Adolfo Carrillo Cabello, PNA Senator from CLA. And I'm asking this question on behalf of Colleen Flaherty Manchester and Charles Rank and myself, who serve as advisors to the task force that prepared the administrative response to the workforce resolution. I first want to thank everyone who participated in the preparation of the response for all the time, work, and efforts dedicated. We are still taking in the report, and some initial bigger pictures are emerging in our minds. We will need more time, certainly, to go through the details, and I'm very happy to hear that there will be more time dedicated at future Senate meetings for this. But as authors of the workforce resolution, we envision this resolution as aiming to address shared issues and common challenges that employees across groups in the university system have observed over many years. The resolution was a landmark accomplishment by the Senate, and the resolution served as an example of how multiple competing priorities can be aligned to call for change in how the university invests in its people. Yet, in the response, segmentation is emphasized with what seems like a type of hole plugging for different groups in different ways, omitting the broader view of employee challenges. As we continue to face a time of major transitions at our university, especially in senior leadership,
30 seconds remaining.
We're curious to know why something like a presidential initiative was not part of the response, given this could be the structure to break down the silos and look holistically at the problem. We are eager to learn more from your team of senior administrators on how can this more effectively engage with the next administration in a more holistic and strategic view. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question. In charging the group that studied the proposal and asking them to wade through and provide specific recommendations, there was not a directive from the president's office to say, hey, look, you can only do things that cost a small amount of money or only do things that are on the easier side. That being said, I do feel that there's a reality to two things. One, that the long and short of really getting at compensation and benefits issues, whether it's for faculty, staff, and others, will require more resources. They would require resources that would be significantly beyond what was already approved as what we thought was a modest $45 million supplemental budget asked to the legislature for this year. And as I mentioned earlier in my report, our early indications are we may not even get that. So the notion that in this first year and in the initial response to the resolution that we'd be able to tackle kind of big dollar challenges, it's just was not going to be very likely to do that. Combining that with the fact that, in my role, I mean, it was clear from the start, I'm an interim president. I'm here for a year. I do think focusing on the things that we already had in place or that we know we can tackle without addressing that significant resource issue was something more viable. But that doesn't, in my conversations going forward with Dr. Cunningham, and I know Mark B's having conversations with her as well. I mean, that clearly, I think that is very open to the notion of what are the best ways to really have her and her team proceed in the future. I'm sure it'll be a high priority for her as well. And I think when the resolution was, at least as I received it and understood it, it was the work of a lot of folks over a long period of time to address issues that have taken many years to build and will probably take a couple years to address and try to resolve.
Next, we have Charles Rank.
Hi, thanks, President Anager. I'm Charles Rank, Civil Service Senator from University Services. And as Adolfo mentioned, I was also on that task force. And it seems that the administrative response mentions focusing on supporting those compensation related items that are identified in the resolution. Yet it seems as though most of those are in category 0 or either category 0, so already being worked on, or off the table. And I'm just wondering, for some of those items that are identified as already being worked on, for those initiatives, can you share with us any accountability measures that you and your team have in mind to gauge success? Thank you.
Okay. I mean, I think if I could, I would defer that question till the next meeting when I have the two co-chairs available who have worked on it in detail. But that's helpful to know that you're looking for that in advance, and so we'll look to make sure to provide that information.
Next is Scott Creer.
Hi, President Ettinger. My apologies for not submitting this in advance. I really should have, but regarding the expansion of UMPD services and them being the first responders for 911 calls, I think that's a great thing in general, but I want to talk more broadly about the university extending its services beyond what our core scope of services is, and a question as to what exactly is paying for these expanded services that we're offering. Given that the city of Minneapolis, they collect significant amounts of tax revenue from those areas that we are now being the primary responders for. And so has the city agreed to kick us those tax revenues in order to pay for these services? Or yet again, are we expanding our services with no way to additionally pay for those? Thank you.
Good question. Thank you, Scott. Good questions. The current work we're doing in terms of the increased aid, we're viewing as a pilot. That's what Chief Clark would describe it as. He is working on it, and we've already realistically had to have that stepped up involvement in particularly the Dinkytown area for over a year with a lot of overtime from our police. I think you raise a very good point that in the long run, if this is something that we're going to be taking on a regular basis, and it's going to either stretch our resources or require new resources, that we absolutely should look for other places to be able to help support that work. I will say the other added element to Chief Clark's interest in being involved in this is just the Minneapolis Police Department has struggled in recruiting due to a whole variety of issues, of course. And so the response time on incidents was struggling in those areas. And so when you get our students, our staff, our folks in such a close proximity to a campus that many people look at as being, hey, I mean, if I'm going to Dinkytown, I feel like I'm at the Twin Cities campus of the university, that those folks are grateful for the UMPD's ability to respond. They can respond more quickly, that they're more familiar with them, but that doesn't resolve the issue, the core issue you raised about resources. That's something we will have to address.
All right, and our last question is from Sarah Buchanan.
Thank you, President Ettinger. This is Sarah Buchanan. I am an associate professor of French on the Morris campus. And I want to just make a comment on the response of the university administration to the workforce reinvestment proposal, especially in terms of the tuition benefit. Now, I understand that a tuition benefit, I want to frame this by saying my kids are in their 30s, already have their educations. So this is not, I'm not advocating for me, but I understand that the previous analysis does suggest that adding this is costly to the university and that not all university members would have children or spouses who benefit from this benefit. I understand those arguments. However, education is a social good. And so even if I am happy to help pay with my taxes, to have my colleagues be able to send their students to the University of Minnesota. And I think it's a real mark against the university system when the state system does offer such a benefit, as do our private competitors and most of the Big Ten. If those institutions can all afford it, I don't see why the University of Minnesota system cannot make this a priority to make this happen. It does impact hires. It impacts people's sense of how the university values them. And I think it's really a shame not to really strive to include that. Thank you very much for listening.
I appreciate your perspective on that. I think if that's correct, Amber, that's the last question. I guess we'll move forward with the next business item, and that would be the Provost report. Provost Croson, would you please go ahead?
Thank you, President Ettinger, and I will add my excitement about our new President, Rebecca Cunningham, joining us in July, not the least of which because we share initials. So I wanted to give you a few updates on some things that are going on maybe regionally and nationally that have big impacts on us at the U and how we are responding to them. The first you might have seen in the news is the the state of South Dakota pulling out of reciprocity with the state of Minnesota. And so what that means is that in theory, South Dakota students would no longer enjoy in-state tuition at Minnesota universities. And again, in theory, Minnesota students would no longer enjoy in-state tuition with South Dakota students. Now, this decision was made in South Dakota, of course, in conjunction with the addition of the state of Minnesota to their South Dakota Promise program, which then qualifies all Minnesota students for in-state tuition at South Dakota universities. However, it does not obligate us to continue offering in-state tuition for South Dakota students at Minnesota or Minnesota State universities as it goes. So, so we had to decide how to respond, and we still have to decide how to respond. The students who were already enrolled at any public university in Minnesota were automatically grandfathered in. So we did not change the tuition levels of any of those students. And because this announcement happened so late in the season, we decided that we were going to preserve in-state tuition for South Dakota students who would be entering any of our campuses fall 2024. Because many of them had applied and been accepted under the presumption that they would be getting in-state tuition, and we didn't want to pull that rug out from under them. We do, however, have a decision to make about students who would be entering fall 25 and beyond. It turns out for two of our campuses, Crookston and Rochester, there is no differential between in-state and out-of-state tuition. So for them, this question is not so relevant. And for Duluth, they recently had approved a new tuition rate, which they're calling the Midwest tuition rate, which is essentially in-state tuition for students in a set of states. And they have just decided to add South Dakota to that set. So that needs to be approved by the Board of Regents, I suspect in May, but that should take care for South Dakota students entering Duluth. So the question on the table is really for South Dakota students entering Morris and Twin Cities in fall 25 and beyond. And we're going to have a task force, do some financial modeling, kind of continue to think about what we want to do for those students. I will add that for graduate and research master's students, we have implemented the same policies. If you're already enrolled, you're already enrolled. If you are coming in fall 2024, we give you the in-state tuition, and that will decide moving ahead for fall 25 start dates. For professional programs, each of which set their own tuition, we have generally, all the professional programs have adopted the same policy. And so again, there'll be independent decisions being made starting for fall 2025. Excuse me. So, so that's one kind of issue that's swirling and has hit the news that we're responding to. A second one that many of you have seen is delays in the FAFSA, which is a national issue for all universities. Very early in this process, when we were told that we would be getting financial data for students in the middle of March instead of early February that we're used to, we delayed our commitment date for students, so they did not need to commit to any of our campuses before May 15th. Excuse me. Since then, there have been some more FAFSA delays, but we don't think it's going to impact all students more broadly. It's more of a subset of students. And so we're identifying which subset of students that is, reaching out, offering individual extensions if they need them. So we're going to continue to monitor that closely and continue to do everything we can to ensure access and accessibility for our especially Pell eligible, but lower income students to our campuses. The final regulatory change I wanted to mention is the gainful employment financial transparency regulations coming out of the Department of Education. This would begin in July. It would require universities to report information on their graduates, what kind of loans they have, and the Department of Education would then cross-tab that information with IRS records and identify the payback for particular universities and particular majors at particular universities. They're also going to compare how much those graduates earn to how much high school graduates earn in the state. And then for programs which do not have a sufficiently good return, and that's defined in different ways, there's some disclosure requirements. And for graduate, post-baccalaureate, graduate professional programs, students need to sign a waiver that says they understand that they are entering a program that does not have a good financial return. These regulations are really aimed at the for-profit educational industry, but of course, lots of nonprofit and public and private institutions like ours are getting caught up in this, especially for majors like music and theater and other types of majors where the earnings potential is not huge upon graduation. So we have a work group. We're working with our Big Ten peers. We're continuing to monitor both the regulation. We, of course, intend to comply with the regulation, but we're also advocating for particular exclusions, whether it's the non-for-profit industry or part of the industry, or whether it's particular majors that have high societal needs. So, for example, one of the programs that is often caught in this net is veterinary medicine. On the other hand, we need more vets, not fewer. And so figuring out how to both address the workforce shortages and comply with the regulation is something we're going to be working on. So with that, I'll pause. Again, I did not have any questions submitted in advance, but I'm happy to take questions about this topic or anything else.
Any questions for Provost Croson? And again, I can't really see the hands very well, so maybe Amber, you can assist with that.
Sure thing. First we have Adolfo.
Good afternoon, Provost Croson, Adolfo Carrillo Cabello, PNA Senator from CLA. I was curious if you have an update on the Universal Access Initiative. I know it has been broadly consulted, but I haven't seen any updates on the status of that. So I'm just curious if you had any updates for us.
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question. So for those of you who have forgotten about all of the consultation that was done, this is a program where students pay a single fee and then receive all the textbooks for whatever classes they're enrolled in, included in that fee. There are opt-out provisions. So of course, students can opt out of the program. Students can opt out, my understanding is, of a single course for the program. And faculty who feel like their educational needs would be hampered can also opt out of the program. So it is an opt-out kind of program. There was a couple of task forces looking at this, recommending it. They did a lot of consultation. They got a lot of feedback. My understanding is that at the moment they are in consultation with the publishers to determine what the fee level would be. Based on that discussion, there's going to be a kind of go, no go decision. And if the decision is made that we're going to proceed, that would be introduced to the Board of Regents at their May and June meetings as a new student fee. I will add that there is also discussion on the legislative / regulatory front about these programs, with some advocates feeling that an opt-in program would be better than an opt-out program. On the other hand, opt-in programs are likely to be more expensive. So we're continuing to watch those regulations, which are still in the discussion rulemaking phase, as we consider what to do moving forward.
Any other questions for the provost? You knocked it all out.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Very good. Item number 9 is the SCC report. Professor B, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Ettinger. Good afternoon, everyone. I have just a few brief updates to share from the March 18th SCC meeting. The first of these relates to a proposal to amend our University Senate rules. So our current rules allow the person sort of making the motion on the docket to accept on the floor amendments they consider to be friendly. No discussion or vote is required. Now, this is a departure from Robert's rules that is codified in our University Senate rules, as well as the rules of the faculty and student senates. After our last Senate meeting, I received a proposal from a PNA senator that we consider amending the University Senate rules to require all amendments, including friendly amendments, to be discussed and voted upon. This would bring our procedures more in line with Robert's rules and also with current rules in the PNA and civil service senates. The SCC discussed this proposal with the senator proposing it and referred the proposal to the informal group of consultative committee chairs and vice chairs from each senate. Now, that group will meet to gauge the level of sort of interest in the proposal and also to assess the possibility of perhaps making the rules consistent across all 5 senates. Any proposed rule changes would, of course, need to be discussed and voted on by the relevant consultative committees, as well as the relevant senates. So no action is being taken at this time, but the discussion is ongoing. And if you have particularly strong feelings, pro or con, about getting rid of friendly amendments, please reach out to me and let me know that. The SCC also heard an update from Professor Edgar Arriaga, who is the chair of the Campus Safety Committee. He reported on some of the work that committee has been doing this year to define what it would mean to have a culture of campus safety that could encompass all aspects of safety on all 5 of our campuses. The SCC provided some feedback, and I anticipate we'll be hearing more about this effort at a future Senate meeting, so I'm not going to say too much more about that now. And finally, the SCC discussed some proposed edits to the formal charge of the Committee on Equity, Access, and Diversity. These edits mostly involve removing language that refers to affirmative action in order to bring the language in the charge in line with other policy changes that have been happening around the university in the wake of the Supreme Court decision on this issue. So 2 final items I want to just briefly mention. As President Ettinger stated in his remarks, the legislature is considering bills that propose changes to the Public Employee Labor Relations Act that could have some significant impacts on employees at the U. And we had invited Melissa Lopez Franzen, the Executive Director of Government Community Relations, to provide a legislative update today, but she wasn't able to make it due to a scheduling conflict. So I've asked one of the University Senate's the U's faculty legislative liaisons, Rob Blair, as we heard, to provide an update that touches on these changes later in the meeting. And then finally, as the president also mentioned earlier, the administration has provided its formal response to the workforce reinvestment resolution. The response is about a page and a half, and it's linked in today's agenda. It's within that response, you'll find a link to the 20-page report created by the task force that was charged to make recommendations on the administration's response. I'm going to ask Amber, if she hasn't already done so, to sort of drop links to both the response and the task force report in the chat so that you can see those easily. And I'm going to give everybody here a homework assignment. I want you to read through both the resolution, the response, and the task force report. That's 3 things prior to our next Senate meeting on April 25th. The reason is that I've invited the co-chairs of the task force to give us a presentation on the task force report and the administration's response, and I hope we can have an informed discussion about it at the time. And this concludes the SCC chair's reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Item number 10 is the legislative update. And as Mark mentioned, we've made a substitution since Executive Director Melissa Lopez Franzen had a conflict arise. So I welcome our faculty legislative liaison, Professor Rob Blair, to provide the update in her place. And Rob, you're on mute.
Thank you, President Ettinger. Let me do a little bit of a view here, slideshow. I always like to lecture because that's what I am. But the university actually has, or the faculty have 2 faculty legislative liaisons. They're supported by the president's office. I didn't know if you knew that. My name's Rob Blair. I am the department head in Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Biology on the St. Paul campus in CFANS. And Donna Spanis-Martin, she couldn't be here today, is my colleague, and she is in the Academic Health Center. And we spend a bit of our time trying to keep track of what's happening at the Capitol. Now, I do need to do a little bit of Minnesota Legislation 101, because if you are like me when I was a senator, I didn't really care and I didn't know anything. But I will say that if you are old enough to remember after school specials and I Am a Bill, it actually works that way. So the Minnesota legislature is a little different in that in odd years, they tend to focus on budget, which you can just grossly think of as dollars. And even years, they think of bonding, which you can grossly think of as buildings. Some senators and representatives also call even years bills year, but that's not true. If you paid attention last year, there are an awful lot of bills going through. Our bonding request is focused on HEAPR. It's an acronym that people throw around quite a bit. It's a Higher Education Asset Preservation and Replacement something or other. I'm sure it's in my at the end of the thing that I can't even see. But HEAPR is what keeps our buildings functioning. The University of Minnesota has identified about a $500 million deficit in what we need to keep our buildings going on all the campuses, and that was our request. And so far it has been had a first reading in capital investment in the Senate, and it's kind of stationary. So we're hoping for money. We'll be lucky. It'll be interesting to see what happens. We also put in a supplemental budget request. This is because last year was budget year and the legislators decided that they would award us money for 1 year out of the 2-year cycle and nothing for the second year of the 2-year cycle. So we requested 45 million again, with the idea of minimizing tuition, retaining faculty, investing in student services, maintaining safe functional classrooms, supporting research and technology infrastructure. Is it in that? Nope, it's not. Right now, we don't see any movement on this at all. Governor Waltz released a budget with nothing in it. We also did a supplemental budget request for the Academic Health Center of 80 million, focused on discovery teams, healthcare and underserved communities, healthcare and outstate, and a number of things. So that's kind of what we've been asking for money. As far as bills are concerned, we've had a few that impact the university. These are what I picked out as the highlights. The RISE Act is a bill that specifies documentation and requirements for education of students with disability, and we've testified in that a couple of times. We also have a bill in for minimum wage protections for people with disabilities. Another big topic being discussed is the transfer of the Cloquet Forestry Center to the Fond du Lac tribe. And finally, I'm going to talk about the Public Employment Labor Relations Act. PERLA it's a law that regulates labor relations between public employers, basically the U and state government, their employees, and the labor organizations that represent their employees. So this was originally enacted in 1980-ish, and it divided employees of the university into 13 distinct groups and said, these groups can be bargaining groups that could unionize. Some of them have unionized, but 50 years later, it's a little bit messy because things have changed. So this law will amend the definition of public employee. That's a simple, straightforward one. It will allow university workers who receive financial aid, participate in work-study programs, or awarded fellowships, meaning all of these are students, to unionize. Currently, anybody receiving financial aid at the university is not allowed to unionize. And then the big feature of the bill revision is about allowing workers self-determination in deciding their bargaining units. For example, right now, you might understand P&A or CS, civil service, and that is your designated bargaining unit. But for example, P&A contains about 6,500 people, and it could be anybody from the person in my department who helps with teaching as a contract faculty person to PJ Fleck, who makes substantially more than she does. And it's very difficult to organize 6,500 people and trying to get a majority to say, let's become part of a union. The new law is going to allow self-determination of what a unit is and the size of that. There's been some discussion about, well, can we have the union of Rob Blair if I can get the AFL-CIO to sponsor me? And so maybe that size will have a little bit of limitations. And then the last thing that I want to point out is sometimes unionized units don't participate in shared governance. When Crookston and the UMD faculty unionized, the regents withdrew the option for shared governance with them. So PELRA is kind of taking up a bit of time thinking about the impacts and finances at the university, but also recognizes that in 50 years, changes should be started to iron out these problems. An illustration of that is, again, going back to P&A, when that group was originally designated, it was faculty and a few contract faculty people. And then in 50 years, it's just grown and grown and grown to include many, many, many different job descriptions, even like residents at the university hospital. I think Amber has put in some links into the chat that are about, oh, not yet, or maybe she did. Oh, yes, she did. So if you are a political junkie and you want to keep track of all of this and see what has been said in testimony and things, there's 4 different good links, 2 to videos, 2 to the actual bills on the PELRA. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. I'm really not expert in PELRA and actually not even politics, but I try. I do want to urge you to sign up for University Advocates. The URL is simple, advocates.umn.edu. If you're interested in what's happening at the state level and at the federal level, it is where we keep contact with you and tell you this is happening. And if something's kind of interesting and maybe urgent and be a good thing for seeing support at the university, like HEPR, we send out notices to you and help you find out who your representatives are. That's it for now. I'm going to unshare. Any questions? And I also have a save line out there too, if anybody has specific questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Blair. Any questions on PELRA or any of the other topics he covered?
And I will say, any mistakes there were totally mine. I take credit for everything I messed up in that presentation. Ellen, oh, am I allowed to call?
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button and everybody disappeared. Ellen Messer, Davidow, Department of English, faculty, senator. I don't understand why it's an either-or situation with either shared governance or union member. They are 2 different organizational structures. They have different decision-making tracks or itineraries. If you're talking about unions, you've got negotiating and you have a culture of conflict, at least for a while. If you're talking about shared governance, you have a much more elaborate kind of swirl track through the organization and a culture of collaboration. I think we need to think about how to hybridize these, particularly how to hybridize these organizational structures, particularly as more constituents in the university do decide to unionize. But I'm wondering if, Rob, if you could talk a little more about that, or if Mark could schedule a discussion for a later Senate meeting, because this is a very serious issue. Thank you all.
Okay, I basically told you everything I know, is that historically, when the 2 faculties, UMD and Crookston, unionized, it wasn't a mandatory either or situation between shared governance things until the regent stepped in and said, nope, you're not doing shared governance now. And I don't know the history of that. I just know the story of that. And I will punt to President Ettinger to present at a later Senate meeting.
Okay, Mark, if you please go ahead if you have some specifics in terms of the question.
I won't jump in with specifics other than to say, Ellen, I am totally in line with what you were thinking, that, I think we kind of want to wait to see where this legislation lands. But Jen Goodnow, the vice chair of the SCC, and I have kind of started looking back at the history of what happened when some of the early unions, so the faculty unions at Duluth and Crookston came into being, and sort of anticipating what we might, what shared governance might look like in the future. So that's our thoughts are in line with where yours are as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Professor Blair?
I will say, working with the Big Ten that also have shared governance, we really have shared governance, and everybody else is amazed at what we do with that. Just saying, it is, and I love your explanation of it swirling. It's like, yes, it's always moving and trying to figure out and getting lots of opinions. All right, thank you for letting me present.
Thanks for doing it. We'll move to item number 11, which is a discussion on the resolution from the Disabilities Issue Committee. Professor Jennifer McComas, who is the chair of the committee, will present the resolution, and then we'll have time for a discussion. So please proceed.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am also joined by two of my colleagues on the committee, on the Disability Issues Committee. David Johnson is with us, as well as Gail Golden. So we'll be happy to answer questions that you may have. Speaking of shared governance, I think this is a really good example of it in my first resolution brought forward to the Senate. So it's kind of an exciting opportunity for me, and I've enjoyed and appreciated the consultation process throughout, and getting input and feedback and guidance from so many of the Senate committees and other groups on campus. For visual reference, what the first slide here is a line of dominoes that are all have looked as though they had been standing, but they're fallen. And for me, this sort of represents the fact that students face many and varied stressors during college, both undergrad and graduate students, actually, from course demands to financial stressors, adjusting to living away from home for undergraduates, often career decisions, social relationships, world events. And it's hard enough to keep all of these in check and stay upright, as it were. But when one is in substance abuse recovery, any one of those could tip and cause a domino effect of everything kind of crashing down. With really adverse consequences for not only the student, but also the university. So on this next slide, what I have pictured is a series of dominoes that are actually standing upright. And there's, instead of the way that we often imagine dominoes kind of face to face, these are shoulder to shoulder. And the first one is tipped, but the second one is supporting it. And I like this image because to me, it represents a possibility that we have as a faculty group here right now. And that is to act to strengthen the university's support for students in recovery by building out the collegiate recovery program to be more like our peer institutions in the Big Ten, namely Iowa and Wisconsin, to meet the basic recommendations of the National Association of Recovery in Higher Education, of which we are a member, but currently do not meet the minimum recommendations for collegiate recovery program, chiefly without an on-campus recovery coordinator. Building our collegiate recovery program promises to fortify our students in recovery so that they can be resilient and not send all the dominoes crashing when they face the daily stressors and challenges that students do encounter. For a bit of context, recovery is an ongoing process that focuses on students' self-management and abstinence from substance use. And when we talk about a collegiate recovery community, that is a comprehensive system of recovery support education, and social networks that stress the importance of peer support for students. So having this strong collegiate recovery community includes rather than isolates students and supports them through stress and pitfalls of ordinary life rather than making them sort of white knuckle their way through on their own. And that's particularly important in this model of recovery embedded in the campus community, where we know that connection is essential to recovery, and therefore sending students off campus, students who are in recovery off campus for support really weakens their campus connections and is really inconsistent with inclusivity. What we're talking about here is a focus on recovery and ongoing connections and support, not initial treatment. So a reasonable comparison regarding the types of support that students need and would find in the campus recovery community might be akin to the Disability Resource Center. Some of what we know and reasons why we really should, why we're advancing this resolution is that we know that drug and alcohol use, abuse, and dependence among students remains high and continues to rise, with as high as 12% of our student population being in recovery from drug and alcohol use, and that's likely to be an underestimate. Research has shown that a clinical care model alone is insufficient to sustain youth's long-term recovery. They really need that recovery system. Mental health and related disability conditions significantly exacerbate recovery processes, necessitating support systems. And the data that were collected from collegiate recovery programs nationwide show that students in collegiate recovery programs or communities have almost a 90% graduation rate compared with a 61% institution-wide graduation rate. So these communities can really make a difference. And when you think about the lost tuition dollars that the university experiences when students have to stop out or drop out due to relapse or other issues related to substance abuse and relapse, that it really is, I think, worth our investment. So you all have a copy of the resolution. In short, be it resolved that the university will commit to funding a full-time recovery coordinator as a critical step toward creating a more supportive campus community for those in recovery from substance use disorder at the University of Minnesota. And we're focused on students, undergraduates, graduate students also need this kind of system. And, you know, we envision the recovery coordinator's position having a number of responsibilities. Some of them actually also finding out what the exact needs are, not only on our campus here in the Twin Cities, but on the system-wide campuses. The needs vary across campuses as we've spoken with different groups. And so finding out what those needs are and the best ways to meet those needs in the various system campuses is going to be an important part of the coordinator's position. I think I will leave it there and open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Professor McComas. The resolution is before the Senate for discussion at this meeting with a vote planned on April 25th, 2024. So if you have a question or comment, we'll go ahead with that. Please raise your hand, and as we've done in past meetings, send a chat to Erin Heath stating whether in your comment is going to be pro, con, or other, so she can put them in the appropriate order. And I'll again ask Amber to kind of, and or Erin to watch for the hands and see what order we should call them in.
Oh, I see Jessica Grittner is here also. I want to mention she also has done a large amount of work on this process and on this resolution with us. So welcome, Jessica. Thanks for being here.
Okay, first we have Tom Hegblum, and he's pro. Please go ahead.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Jennifer, for the proposal and presentation. My name is Tom Hegblum. I'm a lecturer at CCAPS, and I teach in the Integrated Behavioral Health and Addiction Counseling programs. I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, licensed professional clinical counselor, and I'm also in long-term recovery myself from substance use disorder. So clearly I'm pro for this, and I'm really excited to see that there is options being considered for students that might be struggling to have community and environment. The University of Minnesota campus, it's so important. You pointed out beautifully that connection really is the antidote to addiction, and having that in a space where people exist and live and learn and work and play is really important. So I'm on board, and I hope my colleagues will be as well.
Thanks, Tom.
Any other discussion or comments? Well, thank you again for your time today and your energy on this project.
Oh, I see there was one
Okay.
more.
Okay, go ahead.
Kathleen Boris-Laurie, are you pro or con?
I'm pro.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the resolution, Jennifer, and the passion that you have behind it. I definitely would like to support this, and I'm wondering about administratively how you would imagine this position would fit into the university and the funding. If you would just comment on that, please. That'll make it easier for us.
Sure, and I'll welcome David and Gail and Jessica to jump in as well. We have talked with a number of groups, and we envisioned this physically being located in Boynton. And in terms of reporting lines and fiscal pieces, I'm not actually sure about that. David or Gail, do you want to speak?
No. I'm not sure that our committee has the and right to move forward with that type of a discussion yet. But we looked at the different things, and Boynton is certainly a logical location.
Well, I think what we should add is that it's one thing to fund the position. It's also another thing to consider, funds that allow this position to actually do the work. But I think in either case, whether when you consider both, this investment is modest. This is not a gigantic ask. However, I think both things need to be considered.
Yeah, it's really beyond the purview of the Disability Issues Senate Committee to make those decisions or recommendations. But when we look at, as Gail was sort of alluding to, when we look at the millions and millions of dollars that that the university does lose annually by students having to stop out or drop out, it is quite a modest at best investment.
I would just say that I totally agree that it is modest. I just know from experience that that can be a stumbling block, and I just would like to encourage all of us to think about plugging that in, putting it together with another program, that it can be mutually beneficial, and that will make it really fly a lot better. So I do think thinking about it, and there's no doubt that in my mind that we need something like this, but where it should be and how it could really, as Gail mentioned, flourish. So this is meant to be a proactive comment and suggestion to look into.
Yeah, I appreciate that. When we spoke with some of the folks who are in somewhat related programs and who are at Boynton, and Julie Sanum, who was in a position that to provide some sort of similar support. It's clear that the level of the responsibilities that a coordinator would need to execute couldn't really be shared. It's not a position that can be shared doing other responsibilities as well. So just, yeah, something that we.
I think if I could just say one thing briefly, I think it's an excellent question, and an important one. I think also the point that we have gotten, the question we have gotten is how do we know there's a need? But I think estimating a full-time position plus extra funds against that question, it's very important that a need is never going to be certain, but can always be demonstrated by past action. So even modest investment via student volunteers has demonstrated a need, a growth and a need in this area in Boynton. And so I think any analysis will bear this out. If the resolution's passed, it will precipitate more and more specific returns on that.
And certainly Augsburg and University of Iowa, Wisconsin have demonstrated a great need for it, and have continued to expand their programs to address unmet needs. We've also taken this system wide, and we've reflected on a lot of the issues around, there's different sizes of institutions with different responsibilities. So we're in tune to that and what this recovery coordinator may be able to do in terms of networking and starting to build some understanding of their resources and how they're addressing these issues in their own contexts and situations. It's a start.
Good. Well, thank you all very much for presenting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 12, which concerns a letter from the leaders of the 5 consultative committees to state legislators and is presented for information purposes. Item 13 concerns a letter from the SCC to the UMAA in recognition of the UMAA's 120th year anniversary and is also presented for information. Item 14 concerns old business. I'm not aware of any old business for the University Senate. Item 15 concerns new business for the University Senate. Please note that any new business will be referred to committee unless special permission is granted by 2/3 of those voting and present. Is there any new business? And again, I'll ask Amber to look out for the hands for me. Not hearing any. No hands, Amber?
Nope.
Very good. In that case, is there a motion for adjournment? You said it. Do you see such a motion?
So moved, Kylan.
Very good. Amber, please initiate the poll.
Couple more seconds. And last call. Motion carries.
Thank you, everybody, for your attention. See you next meeting. Mark, would you like us to proceed right into the faculty senate portion, or would you prefer a 5-minute break, or what?
I was coughing when I think you asked the question. Was it directed to me, President Edgar?
Yes, yes, it was actually.
I will defer to the Senate office on this one in terms of following previous protocol, past precedent.
We did notice in the agenda that it would begin immediately after, so I think we can go
Okay,
ahead.
that's great. Thank you. I will call the faculty senate to order. My screen's still showing the poll results, kind of blocking the screen, so maybe we can take that down. Item number 2 concerns administrative responses to the faculty senate and is presented for information purposes. Item number 3 is the approval of the minutes from the faculty senate meeting of February 22nd, 2024. Amber, would you please initiate the poll?
Few more seconds. And last call. With 66 ayes and 0 nays, that motion carries.
Very good, thank you. Item number 4 is the FCC report. Professor B, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Ettinger. Again, my report today is brief. The FCC has met twice since our last Senate meeting, including earlier today. One of the 22 specific things listed in the FCC charge is to convene on a regular basis the chairs of the faculty senate committees as a coordinating committee to discuss and track agenda items. And this is something typically done on an annual basis. This year, I've departed somewhat from that routine and have been asking chairs of faculty senate meetings who also serve as ex officio members of the FCC to provide reports to the FCC on the activities of their committees. And so in several recent meetings, we've heard reports from Senate committees on research, faculty affairs, finance and planning, educational policy, as well as the Faculty Advisory Committee on the Health Sciences. And we'll be hearing from the Academic Freedom and Tenure Committee at our next FCC meeting. Sorry, that's not maybe very exciting, but that's what the FCC has been doing. The FCC also consulted with Karen Diver, the Senior Advisor to the President for Native American Affairs, on the development of new policy around Indigenous research. And this item is on today's agenda for discussion, and it will be on a future agenda for further discussion and a vote. And I will let Karen tell us more about that, this important topic later on. The FCC received a report from the National Security Institute Task Force. Now, this is a task force that was convened by Vice President for Research and Innovation, Shashank Priya. It was chaired by Professor Daniel Frisby from the Department of Chemical Engineering and Material Sciences. The report describes what I would call some strategic ambitions to grow that part of the U's research enterprise that deals with a range of issues that touch upon sort of national security. The basic idea would be to create synergisms around research areas for which there is already existing strength at the university. This might include things like bioterrorism, pandemic responses, biomanufacturing, robotics, radiation for hard microelectronics, other things like that. I think compared to many of our peer institutions, this appears to be an element of the U's research portfolio that is currently perhaps underdeveloped, and the task force report outlines plans to address that issue by growing our research efforts in this area. I think this is an issue the Senate will be hearing more about in the future, most likely sometime in the next academic year. The FCC also heard from Professor Eric Watkins, who is our Vice Provost for Distinguished Learning, about a new pilot program aimed at promoting degree completion. So the program is targeted at reaching those students who, for a variety of reasons have left the university before completing their degree. So the program aims to identify and eliminate various barriers in order to make it easier for those students to return to the U to complete their degrees. I think the program struck many of us as a kind of a pretty cool idea, and we hope it succeeds. And I expect this is another effort we'll be hearing more about at a future Senate meeting. Finally, the FCC met with Professors Paxson and Lindsay earlier today. They are the co-chairs of the Faculty Professional Misconduct Review and Implementation Group. Now, if you recall, President Gabel had charged a faculty-led task force chaired by Jen Goodnow to make some recommendations around issues of faculty misconduct. Jen's group provided their final report and recommendations back in February of 2023. And Ned and Lynn's group has been charged with creating and consulting on an action plan that would implement those recommendations. That consultation is underway, and I think Ned and Lynn will be consulting with the full faculty senate later this semester. And that concludes the FCC chair's report. I would take questions if there's time.
Please raise your hand if you have a question for Professor B. Not see. Nobody? All righty. Item 6 is a discussion on a proposed policy that Mark referenced on Indigenous research. And it's my pleasure to call on Karen Diver, the Senior Advisor to the President on Native American Affairs, to present this item. Hi, Karen.
Hello, President Ettinger, members of faculty, Senate. Thank you so much for having me today. So the Indigenous research policy adopts the Indigenous research guidelines. These guidelines were developed by about 25 of your peers across the system to provide guidance around how to do Indigenous research with tribal governments and Indigenous communities. This has been requested by tribes to provide some kind of guidance because, unfortunately, our institution, but actually all of higher ed has kind of gotten the impression from tribal communities that it's not necessarily a partnership. It's something that's done to tribal communities, sometimes without consent, knowledge, and certainly without building cultural competency and relationships. And so what we hear from tribal communities and tribal leadership over and over again, it's like, we're sovereign nations. We are trying to heal our nations. We're trying to make things better. We are caretaking natural resources. We have vast responsibilities. We have research needs. And it's really through that relationship building that maybe we can really come up with some things together where higher ed could actually be in service to tribal sovereignty and the scope of their responsibilities. And so the guidelines were really developed on how do you do that? And, I was getting a lot within the institution of, there's this sense of mystery about dealing with tribal communities. And so the example I generally use is if you've ever done research in a foreign country, what is your normal protocol when you're approaching that? Well, you generally have a host, somebody who's welcoming you and facilitating, and you try to understand the norms and customs of the place that you're going to visit. And of course, you follow the laws of the nation that you are being hosted in. This is no different than dealing with tribal nations. They have the ability to promulgate their own civil regulatory rules, laws, and ordinances. And so you should be invited in and or have a contact that helps facilitate it. So we recommend in the guidance that you find your peer within the tribal hierarchy. So if you're a natural resources person, you see if they have a natural resources person and contact them, or a water person. If it's public health, do they operate a clinic or have a public health department? And so you start there and you start to learn about the community. And even if you have a research idea that you'd like to bring, that's the place to start. Although recommended practices, if you're interested is in service to tribal communities, you start making those relationships prior so that you can have that communication between them. You need to find out if there's a tribal IRB. In many cases, tribal IRBs actually go beyond human subjects because culturally, they very much consider many things in the natural world to be relatives. So their scope is sometimes larger. So you'll want to ask that question. Do I need to use an IRB if it's not human subjects? And then definitely consent to operate on tribal lands. Another of the reasons that this is important isn't from the tribal perspective, it's actually from the university perspective. Increasingly, federal agencies are requiring proof of tribal consent proof of tribal partnership before you submit an application. You won't even make it out of the gate unless you're able to provide a resolution showing that you have permission of tribal government to be on their homelands or to do work within their community with either with their people or on their lands. So some of this is about training us within the University of Minnesota to just be prepared, to be a good partner, understand that the requirements will come from tribal government as well as some of our funding partners. And, you know, as soon as you say those words, you know, tribal and indigenous, you know, they're going to want to know what your community engagement plan is. The final thing I'll say before I take your questions and comments is, upon occasion, I'll get asked, well, you know, well, how about if I just work with Native people off tribal lands? Then I don't have to go through all of that. And that's a little bit disingenuous because what it's saying is that what I want is more important than being accountable to those communities and being in good relations. So in that case, we would actually recommend you ask tribes to designate someone to serve on an advisory board, or you go to off-reservation tribal leadership, Native leadership, like Native nonprofits and things like that. And this is really kind of a best practice around community engaged scholarship. And we would want you to follow those types of protocols and, you know, just to make sure that people are informed and that we're operating to those best practice standards for community engaged scholarship. So that is my elevator pitch. You were provided the document in advance. And then the other part of it is we want to be of service to you from my office, the Office of Native American Affairs. So, you know, how can we facilitate those relationships, give you guidance? There's training, there's associated materials broken down by discipline from a LibGuide that might inform you of, you know, what is some of the current scholarship out there from Indigenous scholarship, and, you know, because some of it is out there. So how can we provide that wraparound and the support from an R1 institution? And with that, I will yield to all of your questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Karen. The draft policy is before the Senate today for discussion with a vote scheduled on April 25th. But Karen is here and available to take questions and hear discussion. And as we did before, please raise your hand and send a chat to Aaron Heath stating whether your comment is pro, con, or other, and I will defer to Aaron to call on people in the appropriate order.
Okay, so just a friendly reminder for those of you who do have comments, please let me know in the chat if you are pro or con.
Ooh, this is new for me. Be gentle. I haven't had a pro.
Oh, no, you're fine.
I haven't had a pro-con meeting yet.
Oh, we're okay. So I mean, Sarah, you showed up first. Are you pro or con?
Yeah, I put it, but evidently just to Amber. I'm so sorry. I sent it to the wrong person. I am pro.
I think this is a wonderful policy and am grateful for it. One of my questions is whether this policy, not whether it applies to First Nation, Inuit, and Métis in Canada, but whether the office who helps. I noticed that there's a notification of Indigenous research, and I looked at the form a little bit. Excuse me, I just inhaled something. Does that form just notify the university, or is that a form that helps to notify the tribes and the nations that researchers are going to be reaching out to them? And if it is a notification to the tribes and nations, does that also extend to our Canadian neighbors?
I'm going to take these a little out of order. It just notifies me personally. And the protocol is actually really applicable to any Aboriginal, Indigenous folks across the world in terms of the protocol and the process and it being a best practice. But for this purposes, we're looking at US-based tribes, Hawaiian and Alaskan.
Okay, next we have David Jacobs, also pro. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm a senator from the School of Public Health. I I mean, there's no option but to be pro for this resolution. In the School of Public Health, we have tried to do research with the Native American communities and have followed these guidelines to the best of our ability. You might have found some lacunae that we didn't know about, so having a policy is good. But I also found over the years that there's kind of a reluctance to do research that might be needed because of these additional hurdles. Now, I agree with your sovereign nation, standard sovereign nation analogy. It is what it is. But I wonder if there's an effort at the same time with this resolution to attempt to build some new bridges and to simplify the process. I'm thinking, in the training that we all get for IRB, the Belmont report, the point was made early on that women and orphans are vulnerable groups, and therefore we should not do research with them. And then it was discovered, hey, wait a minute, we're cheating them by not doing the research. So I wonder if there's any thought along those lines of enhancing the ability to do well-intentioned and successful research.
So the whole point of the relationality and to have the relationships is to actually engage in such a way that it may increase knowledge creation that is really kind of culturally informed that you might miss if you're not a part of that community. And we've seen this in other research relationships that being able to have that staff contact and local expertise make some of the discussions richer and may make you look at things a bit differently. But it's also about building trust and engagement, right? That you are kind of investing the time to understand the community at large, proper techniques for and getting guidance around interviewing who's appropriate. They might help you identify and be that liaison to community, especially if you're engaging in human subject research. That's not really something you can do from the outside without getting that consent and willingness in a partner. I'm going to use the Monoman project as an example, which is not human subject, but natural resources. Once they started building the relationships, they started looking at their own disciplines in a much different way on how it affected the science of their individual disciplines. And they started looking at it from the way the tribe looked at it as a public health issue and a resiliency issue for youth. And they started adding people to their team from other disciplines. Well, now the tribes were super interested because they were telling the story of wild rice from this really interdisciplinary viewpoint. I mean, it's kind of an esoteric example, but I think the point is when we do it we learn different things in a different way, and the investment should be worth it, I would hope.
I think just one quick thing. I think what your answer is that by being fully respectful and opening doors, that the research situation will improve. But I think that's
well, didn't you say that succinctly? Thank you, Professor Jacobs. That's it in a nutshell.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Finished.
Okay, next we have Carolyn Liebler, who is also pro. Carolyn, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Liebler. I'm a senator from sociology, and I'm also affiliated with the Minnesota Population Center, where we work with census data about Native people and tribal communities. And I'm pro, I think this is amazing. And I would like to, since you're here, I would love to have your input on how it might be possible to build these relationships when we're working with tribal census. It's the entire nation, entire United States, all American Indian people and all tribal nations. So just trying to think about how what kinds of community partnerships could we possibly try to nurture?
So I was actually a tribal leader during, one of the census, and, we had great outreach from the feds. They brought us materials. They used tribal members to conduct the door-to-door census so that they saw community members on the other side and not strangers. Tribes will generally cooperate really well on census because it affects us so heavily in terms of the formulas. And there's a tribal census advisory board that helps give some of this guidance at the federal level. And then at the local level, I'll use state of Minnesota. There are the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council is a way to reach out to all of the tribes except for Upper Sioux. They don't participate, so they'll have to be separate. The Minnesota Chippewa tribe covers the 6 Ojibwe tribes except for Red Lake. There are some groupings of the tribes where you can engage with leadership a little bit more efficiently, but you will find willing partners if you reach out for the tribes. You won't generally get a tribal council engaged. You should ask for like their planning staff, things like that, because they are generally the ones that will do implementation and bring it through their chain of command.
And if I could just follow up and ask, would you recommend connecting with a limited number of tribal partners, or trying to just, there's so many tribal nations. If once we make connections with maybe 5 people, that feels like a good large number.
You know what? I'm happy to give you some advice offline if you'd like to send me an email.
Sure.
Because it's a little more particular than the policy. I'm just Karen D at umn.edu, and we'll see if we can't find you some manageable solutions.
Thanks for your help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, next we have Kat Hayes. Kat is also pro. Please go ahead.
Hi, Karen. Kat Hayes, Senator, representing Anthropology Department. So my question, I'm absolutely pro for this policy. I think it's well needed and can't wait for its implementation. My question relates to whether the policy might at some point extend to cover things like previously collected data and collections, especially as relates to the new regulations under NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kat. I actually wrote that down because we do talk about data sovereignty and having agreements of tribes up front about what you're going to do with the information that you generate. I've used examples with folks of sometimes tribes are great for you to put aggregated data out there, but they prefer not disaggregated data particular to maybe their tribe, but they want the data to be useful otherwise, right? So we didn't consider previously collected data, but we would consider that what would be cultural patrimony in a way. And many tribes will actually now, if they have an IRB process, tell you you get to generate the data once and use it once. And if you're going to use it in a new way, you're going to have to come back and get consent. It might not be as extensive as the first time, but they're going to want to know how you use it. Once again, I'm going to use the Mahnomen Project as an example. Anytime they're publishing, they're doing a poster session, they're going to a conference, they touch bases with their tribal partners really simply in an email and say, we're going to be doing this. Are there any objections? And rarely are there, but it's a good way to make sure that tribes know that this is an ongoing and living result of the partnership. And it's just checking in to make sure that they continue to be okay with it. So, but that's a good point. And we do point out in the policy that this is a learning document. I would very much expect, as we all do this and get really good at it and excited about it and build these relationships, we'll find things like that. And I wrote it down that we can bring in that are value add that continue to provide us additional guidance.
Thank
So
you.
thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, and now we have Shanna Waters. Shanna, please go ahead. She is also pro.
Good afternoon. I'm so thankful that you're doing this. I'm actually an enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in South Dakota. Even though I wasn't born on the reservation, my entire family was. And so I work with Nora Livesay from the Ojibwe People's Dictionary, and I just want to reinforce to everybody that trust is a very important part of developing relationships when you're working with Indigenous peoples. You shouldn't, I would encourage you not to see it as a hurdle, but as a way to rebuild some of the issues that developed over time in the way in which people like my ancestors were treated. And so by committing to this type of resolution and committing to this type of behavior on anyone's part who works with Indigenous peoples is reassuring and reaffirming that we value their communities that may look very different from our own. And so one of the things that I'll use as an example is language. I'm helping the Ojibwe People's Dictionary revamp their back end because I'm from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. And they don't see the language as belonging to us. They see the language as belonging to them. And so having a very respectful way of handling the data and not acting like just because we collected it or we did something with it that we own it, that is a necessary part of recovering and rebuilding trust. So Karen, thank you for the work that you're doing. I strongly am pro for this.
Thank you very much. I mean, she actually really kind of highlights something that is not something you can get across in a document with these kinds of words, but it is, the engagement really is about understanding community values and what drives them to seek it out. I mean, we do it a lot because it's knowledge creation or we want to, solve a problem. And tribal communities, once you understand what their interest is in it, I go back to what I said with the first question is, it might actually be a value add to how we look at delivering our work, how we frame our work, how we undertake our work, and be really a value add to the scholarship. Anything else?
Thank you so much for sharing with us today, Karen.
Okay, thank you. And I will see you all next month. And please email me in the meantime if something comes up in your minds afterwards, or even better yet, we have a bunch of projects that we can do. So thank you so much.
Very good. We'll move to item number 7, which concerns proposed changes to the makeup work policy. The Senate Committee on Educational Policy and the Faculty Consultative Committee have reviewed and approved amendments to the policy. And so today there's going to be, if there's any discussion before we vote, we'll proceed with that. And again, if you could help me see if there are any questions, that would be great. I also see that Professor Shield is poised and ready just in case we have any questions.
I'm ready.
Yes.
Not seeing anyone.
Okay. Let's proceed with the vote. Amber, would you please prepare the poll?
A few more seconds if you wish to vote. And a last call. There being 73 ayes and 0 nays, that motion carries. Oh, sorry, 1 nay, still carries.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 8, which concerns old business. There is no old business for the Faculty Senate today. Item 9 concerns new business for the Faculty Senate. Please note that any new business will be referred to committee unless special permission is granted by 2/3 of those voting and present. Is there any new business today? Hearing none, is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Very good. Amber, please initiate the polls.
Another second or two. And last call. With 83 ayes and 0 nays, that motion carries.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.